Good evening, good day, greetings, and salutations with a side of welcome and another side of the Safe Room featuring security side quests. Welcome to today's adventure, today's bit of information. I am one of your hosts, Tristan Watty, and I'm joined by the mysterious, the marvelous, the great. See how I switch over to G's because it is Russ. How you doing, Russ?
Good. How's it going? How are you doing this fine Monday?
I am doing just peachy keen. I think that's the words that we use for a Monday because it's a happy Monday, right? After a holiday weekend over here in the States. So
Exactly.
it's great trying to, walk a little bit more, trying to say hi to everybody like Ari. Thank you for joining. And also to just reintroduce myself because we always like to do it twice for the people on the other side of the internet. So my name is Tristan Watty, and I join you from the Professional Services Division of AWS, where we help to accelerate customers to the cloud in a secure manner. And that's why I'm a security consultant, delivery consultant, heard it both ways. And Russ, where are you coming from today?
I'm coming from the customer incident response team. We help customers contain and mitigate their incident response.
Yes. And as always, 10 billion points to the CERT team because of everything that they do on a daily basis. All right. And to you out there, feel free to say, hey, where are you joining in from? Where are you tuning in from? So we can give you some points that add up to nothing but fun from your side. But if you want a little bit more detailed information that you want to share with us, feel free to drop in the chat today an answer that I hold near and dear to my heart. And that is because it's from the 90s with my bias. What's your favorite TV sitcom intro song? This is a fun one. So feel free to answer this. Russ, what are you going with? Favorite TV sitcom intro song? It doesn't have to be the 90s, but it kind of does when it comes to this, but it doesn't.
It does a little bit. So I'm going to have to go with Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That's just iconic. Come on, that's one of the greatest intros. I mean, I bet you could still sing it word for word right now.
Yeah.
And that show hasn't been on for 25 years.
Yeah, exactly. Until that stint in the middle where if you turned on like 4 different channels, it was playing on all 4 channels. There was a period in the 2000s when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great choice. Right? And now I'm singing it in my head. I tried not to. But
it's impossible.
Another one for me is Family Matters. That theme, it's a rare condition, that opening that gets me all the time. Right? See, we have one for Fresh Prince. Yeah. So feel free if we missed a couple because there's a lot. You can go down the list of Step by Step and the whole TGIF Friday block. Right? I didn't date it myself, but it's worth it for those great theme songs. But outside of that, I digress because we have some fun security bits of information to share. But before we do that is what are we talking about today? And where did we come from last week, Russ?
Yeah, so last week was a fun one. That was our security leveling up episode. It's kind of like a recap episode, doing a little bit of discussion about all the things that we talked about so far this year. It was our 20th episode, so that's exciting. But this week, we're going to talk about shifting security to the left. This is our AWS achievement unlocked, a little achievement over your head unlocking, shifting security to the left. I think we'll get into that.
The fun bits, that's what we're going to get into because I just picture, and we'll work on this, a little achievement unlocked, just populating, right? And it's just going to be an icon of Russ. It's just achievement unlocked. That's what we're going to get. And, it could be a hat. That would be a good one. Hat and glasses. Those would be the achievements. So, but I think to kick off and kind of get where we're going with the shifted left, I think we should start off with what we like to do, a poll, right?
Love some
poll. If we're talking about shifting left, what is your current DevSecOps achievement level, right? Put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat. Are you just starting out on your quests? Are you in tutorial mode? Are you the mid game? Are you the end game? Or if you're in some side quests, feel free to deviate a little bit. No bias here at all. But I see. It's always funny. How do we answer this, Russ? Because I feel like a consistent and constant learner. So I'm always feel like I'm in tutorial mode just from the fact of like, oh, there's a cool way to do this, a cool way to do this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely feel like that too. I was actually going to say, I feel like I'm pretty much in mid game where me personally, I have some security automation, but like as far as my whole team goes, I feel like we are coming up on end game boss level. But me personally, I feel like I'm mid game, and like you said, there's always so much more to learn. There's so much more to do, to integrate. I mean, it's pretty much nonstop. So I'm not sure if you ever get to the true final boss, but yeah, I think I agree. I'd say mid game.
Yeah, there's multiple phases, right? It's one of those games where it's like, oh, I beat the boss. No, the health bar comes back on the screen, right? And it's just like, hey, we got some more stuff to do. So, yeah, I think it's good to know and hear and understand kind of where you're coming from, right? Mm-hmm. So, feel free to think about it, put it in the chat. What to help, stimulate some of that thought process. Kind of what we're going to be talking about today is kind of a couple of key areas. And one is, hey, do you have some security foundations? Right? When it comes to automation and shifting left, what security foundations do you have? Do you have an understanding of something like the shared responsibility model? Do you leverage AWS services like Control Tower or Security Hub or Guard Duty, right, to go to that defense in depth principle? And then from there, what we're going to dive into is like, how do you automate your security champions? And what we mean by that is usually there are some individuals that want to take part in their security culture, but they may not have all the wide range and breadth and depth when it comes to everything security, but they're trying to follow. So how do you spread out your security expertise and scale it throughout your organization? By leveraging something like automation to be a force multiplier. And then from there, leveling up the pipelines. How do you level up your pipelines? What are your pipelines for your organization? Are you using services like Code Pipeline, right? It's in the name, right? To shift left in your approach. And when you think of it from a security perspective, how, when you shift left, do you catch security issues, right? How do you unlock the achievement when it comes to your own security posture? And how do you overall mature your security so that you can follow frameworks and you can follow different, let's say, compliance requirements? And I always give a shout out to all the compliance folks on the other side of the internet, because there's a lot that goes into it. And hopefully some automation may help us level up, right? I always like to use level up a couple of times because then you're like, hey, I leveled up. What, on what? I don't know. But it sticks in your head, right?
Definitely.
I think part of this kind of goes back to another thought and another poll, right? The polls are easy because you can kind of see the different pieces of it. And as always, feel free to drop the numbers in the chat. But when you think of your security services, which one is your main character? This is an interesting one, right? Who's the side character? Who's the main character? Who's the protagonist?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Russ, protagonist, main character, who are you going with?
So, I think just because of what I do and dealing with the operations side of the house so much, I'm going to have to go with Guard Duty, just because, without any sort of detection system, well, you're going to have a bad time. So I think that Guard Duty, for me, is kind of my main character, but I think also that, so long as you are using security services, I think we're on the right path. I think outside of like my day-to-day in incident response, I'd probably say Security Hub, but it also depends on your context and your environment and what you're doing, because some people might be using code guru very specifically and for most of their code. And so that might be their primary main character. So definitely interesting to see. Put 1 through 5 in the chat. Let's see like what everyone else thinks, because I think it's a good question.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because it's just like you were saying, is different individuals may see themselves as different main characters with the security services that they leverage. Like for me, I gravitate towards Security Hub as the main character. Right? It might be some of the Dragon Ball Z bias where give me all your powers. Well, give me all your security findings, right?
Yeah,
Let
right.
me aggregate this into something visual that you can comprehend. And that's kind of where I come from with the Security Hub side of the house. So, yeah. And it's also okay to be number 5, character selection, because that means you're moving and trying to understand what the different pieces go into your overall puzzle, right? Because
exactly,
there's maturity levels to every AWS environment. And you have to realize, where are you in your journey? Are you in the crawl phase? Or are you in the walk phase? Or are you in the run phase? Right? And starting to go from there. So important pieces. Also important to say, hello, thank you for joining today. So as we start to talk about shifting left, right, I think part of it, and we mentioned this before, is developing kind of a certain mindset. We talked about a threat modeling mindset, but we also have to talk about the DevSecOps mindset, right? Because that's a cultural transformation throughout the organization. What I mean by that is that shifting left approach. So it shifts security from being a gatekeeper role to becoming a collaborative partner. I think that's a good word, right? A collaborative partner in order to deliver velocity. And what do I mean by that? Well, it establishes your guardrails, your boundaries, and helps to accelerate a shared responsibility. You see what I did there? Across different teams, right? While automating security controls, and then the mindset starts to permeate throughout the different pieces of the organization. Right? And this is essential for leveraging AWS in your overall maturity journey itself, right? Because there are different services that you can leverage. We just named 4 main characters, but those aren't even all the characters on the sheet, right? It's just, you could pull out like a scroll and it's like, here's all these different mechanisms. And it's like, how do I approach this? Well, through APIs, but right. See, the dad type jokes, they don't stop rolling here on this show.
I was gonna say the AWS dad jokes are on point today.
Yeah, just keep going, right? I think is coming off the holiday. You're still in that that jokey mood, and no, it's just us. But as you start to think about these services, right, we get excited for the reason of there's so many pieces to optimize your environment, right, based on your specific use cases, your needs. And leveraging something like IAC is very important because, hey, it's something that's repeatable, something that could scale, something you could put guardrails, you could put scanning mechanisms in. Mm-hmm. The important part is if you have different, let's say, pieces like CloudFormation Guard or something along those lines, or third-party integrations, I would say the shout out to Checkov scanning right there. Because when you are leveraging policy as code, then you can leverage templates and configuration files that you can permeate throughout your organization that fits your guidelines and guardrails. You need to follow some NIST and CIS standards. There you go. Right? That's part of the shifting left mentality. So I would say, Russ, when it comes to just leveraging IAC code and kind of the mechanisms that go with it, how important would you classify it as on a day-to-day?
I do find it to be very important. Not just from your proactive security, but also from a reactive security approach. Being able to, I think we brought this up before, but being able to kind of tear down and rebuild in a, response type scenario. So whether that's, like a disaster recovery or an incident recovery, whatever it might be, there's a lot of strong benefits with having that approach using the infrastructure as code. So I definitely see that as a thing, especially when, you know, you're in, say, an incident type of scenario and you're like, well, why is this one different than all the others? You know, it's a little bit easier to kind of see, hey, this is, you know, the EC2 instance that's not like the rest of them. Maybe this one's the ones that's, maybe this is one of the ones that is, you know, compromised or breached or whatever. But also the opposite is true, is, you know, when you're looking through an incident and you're like, this is all over the place. Like, there's no standardization whatsoever. How do you know what this one's supposed to be doing versus this one? And there's not any answers because, you know, nothing's templated or built using, you know, config files or anything like that. So it's all kind of a jumbled mess, and we got to kind of figure out like what should be happening on those versus what shouldn't be. It turns into a nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when you think of the scale of an organization where you might have and different ways people carry out coding and delivering stuff from environment to environment, right? You go from dev, UAT, prod, and the thing is, you have to understand, okay, before something is promoted into the next environment, what are the guardrails that you have in place, right? What tools do you have to detect misconfigurations? So if you have an overly permissive security group, is something going to catch that, right? Unencrypted data stores or public access settings on something. Those are all things that you want to catch in the lower environment. For what reason? Well, if it gets to prod, that can be a big thing, right? And that's how you get a good ticket to see Russ live in person, right? So you want to make sure you don't get that ticket. It's not a golden ticket. It's one of those things that you want to put into place ahead of time, right? So think of your CI/CD and kind of the shifting left and that whole mentality, because when you start to get to a certain maturity or enterprise scale level, then you want to have these automations and the shifting left in place. Because click ops, as we like to call it, when you're going around the different, screens, and it's like, okay, this is cool, makes it great. But if you want to scale, then you want to start leveraging the IAC because of these different mechanisms. Because when you get to a point, you don't want to do both, right? Because let's say if you redeploy something, then those configuration changes that you have are going to cause a little bit of drift. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. So, yeah, always like to add that asterisk to it because this is all part of your journey in its whole, right? And we talked about how do we also automate the security champions within your org, because it's a very important part of that growth. If you were looking at the character arc as a whole, right, if this was a series, you want to make sure that, like, hey, all the characters get their fair share of screen time, that they get their plot points out. And how do they do that? Well, you remove some of those barriers, but you put into place guardrails. So when you think of guardrails, Russ, where are we coming from with that?
Yeah, so I think of guardrails, I think of things like, automated security checks. So depending on what type of environment you're looking for, I mean, you have like your different types of application security testing. So your SaaS, DAST, SCA, whatever. And then trying to integrate those automated checks into your pipeline, right? So you want that security, those security checks to be a regular part of your pipeline. So you want to implement some sort of continuous, security validation. So, using those tools and these checks in your CI/CD pipeline, you're allowing it to continuously run. It's not a point in time check. It's a continuously monitoring system, which you cannot do with a manual. Well, you can do with a manual operation, but you're talking about 24/7 ops and follow the sun models and all that sort of thing. Especially when you're looking to do things a bit more frugal, like we like to do here at AWS. That doesn't really kind of mesh very well with that whole philosophy and how you're trying to do security. So you're talking about things like the static and dynamic application testing, automated penetration testing tools, security validation checks in your environment, kind of doing those things to be able to get ahead of just your kind of passive detections, your guard duty, your seam tooling, whatever that may be, getting in early in the process. That's the whole point of moving left, right? Is to switch from like a passive or reactive type of approach to being a little bit more proactive, right?
Mhm.
So using those security validations to create a findings workflow. What do you do when there is something that alerts and you're like, okay, we need to check this. So kind of creating that workflow, having a clear process for handling findings. So whether that's using something like Jira or an issue tracking software tooling, or something like that, so that way you can kind of have these all in a single place. You can easily prioritize the findings because they're in one central location. And then also, the ownership of that finding, like who will be running that? Is that, on the service team because, that's part of their CI/CD pipeline? Is that something where you bring in a security expert to be able to, like a application security type of engineer to bring them in to help assist with the finding? Like there's a lot of things that go into that, even though it's automated. Having those workflows and those processes built ahead of time allows you to be, move further and further left as you go.
And meet compliance. That's the other thing, right? That's
Absolutely.
one of the big items. When you have services like config, security hub, guard duty, you can have those automatic checks, like you were mentioning, to evaluate the resources against compliance requirements. And part of that structure, Bevan mentions preventative SCPs. That's a big part, right? Of, hey,
absolutely,
AWS has a ton of services. Do you want all of them active within your production and other environments? No, right? You want to have a clear-cut process, right? Of saying, hey, my company, my organization is going to use these 50, these 100 services. Everything else blocked for now. And then we can move stuff in as we want. So the way you do that, SCPs. So puts those preventive guardrails in place. Thank you, Bevan, for that comment.
Definitely. Absolutely. And then not only having those guardrails, but what happens if those guardrails are, let's say, overcome in a specific instance? You also want to be able to start the process of automating that response or remediation process. So for example, say you have a certain type of finding, and all of those findings can be remediated with a simple change. For example, like an instance shows up with very overly permissive controls. That is a finding that'll probably pop up. So you want to be able to automatically have that, say, against a basic standard list of your preferred controls. So say opening specific ports or whatever, especially when you have a more mature security environment where you have these sorts of things for like tagging things. And so if this, instance shows up with overly permissive, that's okay because it's a, internet facing, 8443 type of instance versus ones that you don't want. And so you're like, okay, this can only be opened on port 22 for this, IP range based off of your, corporate VPN IP range. So you want those sorts of things to be if not completely automated remediation or response, at least on the way to do something like that. So when you have cloud resources that are misconfigured, or you have something that doesn't follow along with your IAC for, consistent deployments with similar config and rules, then you want to be able to have those already started before a human even looks at them. Because we're trying to move over to proactive instead of reactive. So you want these things to happen as quickly as you can and as instant as possible to try to prevent these things from being an issue for, say, 2 to 3 weeks before you realize, oh no, something terrible has happened.
Oh no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you definitely want to be able to kind of automate those before they become your oh no moments and hey, we should talk to Russ on the incident response team. Yeah.
And you bring up some great points with just having the ability to auto-remediate items, right? That's a big component of, hey, I have this workflow automation that says if this comes in, take this action, right? Whether it's shutting down or blocking or removing or isolating, right? All these mechanisms that you have at your disposal with even the simplest automation workflow itself. And that's kind of that whole shifting left mentality of where we're coming from with this, right? So if you think about where you are within your security journey, you want to first map out, hey, where is my organization today? Do we have guardrails in place? Are we following best practices like the security reference architecture or even the incident response plans and things of that nature, right? Where you have these different items, you have your target state security strategy. It's a lot of documents, right? But the reason why you have all of these documents is that you're mapping out your flow. Because what often happens is, and we see this with customers, is, hey, I need something done yesterday. So let us implement. Let's just implement it. Go. But what they don't do is take the step back and think of, okay, what are the possible ramifications from this piece? Right? What am I really granting access to? So if you have a company or organization that you say, hey, just give these people full access, use the managed policies, then that could be something that comes back down later down the line of like, okay, how long are you granting it for? Who are you granting it to? Is it just the overall role, or are you trying to do a user account where you should be doing stuff with role? But all these things come into play, right? So I think an important part to consider is, where are we now? Where are we going? And where do we come from? An important thing, right? Because one of the things that we like to do is
where'd you come from? Where'd you go, Cat Night Joe?
You're picking up what I was putting down. So one of the other pieces is looking at the legends that you hear from other environments. See, 10 points to Gryffindor. So when you think of this, you start to go through and think of different adventures, different side quests that other individuals or even yourself may have went on. So as we start today's side quest, we start to think about, hey, what do I do as maybe a DevSecOps individual, an individual who was tasked with understanding, hey, we just moved to the AWS environment, and maybe they're a retail company. Let's go with that, mid-sized retail company, right? We migrated our applications. We're embracing the cloud native development. Okay, now we're shipping things faster than ever. We are using infrastructure as code. We have automated deployments. We checked off everything. Or did we? Because assessments occur. And then when you look at the general assessments, what they look at is the foundations. And you start to see, hey, we shipped everything, but there's some cracks maybe within our security foundation. Developers had full autonomy to deploy resources, right? Anonymous, right? That song was stuck in my head. We were talking about 90s songs. So basic security controls, Maybe they were missing, hey, templates. Security groups were overly permissive. All these items, all the things that you can think about when you were moving fast, but you didn't have those preventative guardrails in place, is where we start today's side quest. So let us start with that in mind. So for your first time joiners, this is our side quest board where we help to illustrate and map out things that a lot of individuals wish they knew when they first started, because we're mapping out the path, the trajectory of, hey, we have our authenticated users and we have our group of just users who may not be related to our environment. So what place do we go? Well, as SideQuest Legend has it, there's paths that we can take. There's services we can implement on this route. So if we're thinking about services and we're a mid-sized retail company, Russ, which path do we go down? What service do we want to think about? Or services, I should say, because there's a lot of main characters, as we discovered.
There are so many. But I think I would probably start with CloudFormation.
Okay, CloudFormation. That is a good place to start. So when you are thinking about CloudFormation, you're thinking of IAC.
Mm-hmm.
So we have different IAC templates. One of the challenges could be, hey, there's no security standards. Maybe we don't have security group configurations. Maybe we have a lack of training. And if we want to get to a place where we're leveraging, hey, templates, do we have something to auto-remediate? And I throw down Lambda face up, because maybe we have these templates, these CloudFormations, but we need a mechanism to auto-remediate them, because we have this group of users that's just waiting for our template to get deployed in such a manner that doesn't really work out for the best interests of our organization. So we have a Lambda that is remediating some of the templates in our mid-sized retail company. Where do we go from here, Russ? What services pop into your head?
Let's see. So we have our Lambda, probably config.
Okay, config. So
we'll set up rules for resource.
Yes. So we have Lambda, and then we have config. So one of the things that we're trying to evaluate, and this is where I'm just going to throw down another automation tool. And what is that automation tool? Step function. So as you notice, I'm going along an automated route with the different services you chose, because, hey, we have configuration alerts, right? We have Lambda in place somehow to auto-remediate things, but what we're trying to get back up to and understand, show this a little bit more clearly. So we have Lambdas, we have step function. What are our step functions doing for us?
So step functions, that's the beautiful thing, is they could be doing anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can use step functions for a lot of these things, for security baselining, security reviews, and then you can also do step functions for automated response and remediation.
Yes, and that's definitely some good points to call out, because there are a number of different items that your step functions could do. And one of the items that you can make a call out to is, hey, if there's certain things that are popping up in my CloudFormation, CloudTrail logs, do this, right? Let's take this step. You see this? Take this step, right? So if we're going down this path of understanding how automation and how our mind is shifting left, right? One of the questions I like to ask different individuals is, if security was a video game boss, what name would you give it? What would its name be? Right? And it's an interesting question. Russ, what is your first thought for, if security was a video game boss, what name would you give it?
I would give it the Unseen.
The Unseen. Yeah.
Yeah, because really, that's what happens when you don't have visibility and you can't see when something is off or wrong.
Yeah.
So for me, from especially from an operations perspective of like finding bad, that's what I'd go with.
Yes. And with that, with the unseen approaching, what we start to gather is more and more information to unseen to make it seen. All right. We'll work on that diagram and that modeling right there. But some of the ways to make it seen is CloudTrail, guard duty, and then we put into place all the way up there when we get to Security Hub, right? We're trying to make the scene or the unseen scene. So we need some visibility, some tools to do so. And I would also care to model what we also want to do is follow different compliance mechanisms. So one of the things that I throw down is Macy. And you may say, why just throw down a random Macy? Well, if we're trying to make something unseen seen, then we also have to make sure that, hey, our data, are we following the compliance items that we were speaking about, right? Because that's an important part of trying to make the unseen seen, right? If you're curious, my name for security's video game boss is, oh, this is fine, right? Right? Oh, this is fine. You could dissect that a couple different ways, but the main item is think about the path that you use to get here, right? So you have unauthenticated users. Well, you also have your authenticated users, and you want to take the path that has some automation and you have some guardrails. So those individuals who are building within your environment, as we were mentioning before, have that shared responsibility, not the model, but with the different developers and different people and I would say characters, right? Because we're using the main characters within your overall organizational structure. And making the unseen seen couldn't be as simple as putting into place something like event-driven architecture, right? And automation, because when you start to have CloudTrail and Guard Duty report into Security Hub, then you can take certain steps. But it's also important to consider other mechanisms like Macy, because that might not be top of mind because you're not thinking of DLP or things along those lines. So putting in place those items, I think, is a good approach, right? Because they often ask, when you are a security team leader, what is the cheat code that you're using? AKA, what is the best practice or tip that you would like to share? And there's a couple that I can mention. But Russ, if you were a security team leader, what is the cheat code when it comes to automation?
The cheat code for automation, I would probably say, well, okay, so my cheat code is having clear baseline metrics. But for the purpose of this, I think that, my cheat code is don't rebuild or reinvent the wheel. There's so many things out there for you. You don't have to build every single, step function or Lambda or whatever. You don't have to completely do things all yourself and create all these tools and do everything. There's a level of trust in the services and pre-existing tools out there. So I think that's another big one, is kind of thinking about what you need to do and what you're trying to accomplish, and then using the right tool for that purpose. Instead of kind of it kind of goes to not chasing the shiny object, but also to ensure that you have what you need to accomplish, the basic level of security for your organization.
Yes, and that is well said, because that's some of the foundational items that people sometimes kind of brush by, right? If this is the intro, it's like, oh, I could skip over this part. It's like, no, you should really look at this. This is how you beat the game, right? This is how you become successful, and that's how you have great outcomes. Because when I think of a cheat code, I think it's documentation. Right, it's tagging, right? Those are some cheat codes that are often overlooked. It's like, how do you automate everything? Well, do you have tagging in place? Do you have a tagging methodology within your organization, right? Because when you start to look at hey, how do I level up my overall security posture? How do I level up my pipeline? Well, we have our board, so we have to hit the good old pause, timeout of the Zach Morris variety and start to think about, hey, we have these different pieces of the puzzle. All right, let's delve in. Right? So when you start to think of your pipelines as a whole, I think we'll start there. So when you start to think of my CI/CD, right? All right, how do I level it up? Well, first you understand what it does. And then the second part is, do you have security checkpoints? Right? And security checkpoints are very important throughout your CI/CD, right? Because when you're looking at pipelines like this, we're zoomed in, we're looking at this one particular moment in time, but as always, you have to zoom back out and start to think about, hey, if somebody were to look at how we scale our things, do you get an applause? Everybody in security like yes throughout the organization, or do you have a certain feeling that something is off? And that's where you start, because you start to dig in, because you slowly build up like, hey, something's not right. Hey, you know, just before something happens within a movie, a TV show, a cartoon or something, the music changes and something is occurring. Well, the key part of this is to understand, hey, through the different stages of my development, what is being evaluated, right? What security requirements is my code being checked against? Right? So you have your development environments, you have your UAT, your test, and your prod, let's say, right? So do each of these get the same level of scrutiny? Well, that's a question an organization has to answer, because how many security checks do you have in place? And then if there's vulnerabilities within your code, what are you using to detect said vulnerabilities? Right? Are you using services like Inspector or Code Guru Security or ECR or Amazon Q Developer? There's so many pieces of the puzzle that you can integrate, but you want to make sure that each phase has something to it. And then that is managed. And what I mean by managed is that it's actively, one, reviewed, not only against, let's say, compliance, think of the PCI DSS or HIPAA or SOC 2, but what are your policies as an organization? Do you, sometimes what we see customers doing is that they want to go one step further beyond those items, because these policies, these compliance frameworks, they're always being evaluated, right? And I often think about how we went from, oh, you just need a password with this many characters in this. And then 2 years later, it's like, hey, now you need this many in this. Well, if you had started out with your own standards, then you would already be ahead of the curve. And that's kind of where you want to stay. And with a policy as code as approach, it allows your security standards to evolve. And it also allows your security team to focus on looking into the future. What is your roadmap for, 2, 5, or maybe 7 years down the line? And it may look far, but it kind of goes by fast, right? Look, we're already more than halfway through the year.
That's the magic 8 ball, and it's not good.
Yeah, it's not good, right? It's right. And often when you look for the magic 8 ball approach, is just like asking them later. And when later comes, you're like, oh, let me ask you. It's like, oh, well, you should have did this. Right? And that's what we're trying to avoid by establishing, one, the guardrails, but two, what are your reporting metrics around those guardrails? Right? What are you looking at? How are you visualizing these different items? We spoke about Security Hub, but there's other services that you can leverage, like QuickSight and CloudWatch and stuff like that, depending on your use case. But overall, you want a mechanism with a KPI, and that's one of the key points. Because what are you gauging against? Industry standards? Are you looking and having conversation with your peers in the same space as you, or in different spaces, to see and share details from, oh, this is what we leveraged. important part. And that's kind of where we start to go from understanding what documentation, and to Russ's earlier point, how we leverage stuff that's pre-existing, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel for your own standard. You just have to, customize it. Think of the bikes back in the day, right? You had your little bike, and it's like you're not making the bike from scratch to go outside. You're getting a predefined, pre-built bike, hopefully, and
then you add the pegs on your own, the customized.
Exactly. See, Russ went to the seminar, because when you start to think about that, you add the pegs, you add the stickers, you add the little items to make it unique to your approach and your use case. Right? So when you try to put the bike together yourself, sometimes you may think like, oh, let me use this wheel and this wheel. But then you have two different wheel types. And do they work? Yeah. But do they work against each other? Yeah, because they're two different wheel types. So these are things that you have to think about. And when we're thinking about our pipeline as a whole, we say level up the pipeline, but you often have to think of what goes into leveling up. So the other piece of that is another poll. And that poll is, hey, how do you level up, or what power up does your pipeline need? And feel free to put 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 in the chat, because there's a couple of different pieces to this. Is, hey, automated vulnerability scanning, IAC security checks, continuous compliance monitoring, all are great things. So, Russ, where does your heart lean in this?
So my heart leans towards continuous compliance monitoring. If we're talking about compliance from, an organization standard, as opposed to broader compliance check, instead of talking about like PCI or whatever, really talking about, for me, just how are you in compliance with your own rules, and whatever sort of, systems, methodology, or whatever that you're putting in place, and seeing, how that works on your environment continuously. So, for example, checking to see, when those, say, out of compliance, or when those findings pop up, do they come up in the same time frame or area, or what have you? That's what I was thinking. I think I was trying to purposefully subvert the answer a little bit, but that's what I think is continuous compliance. I'm a sucker for anything that's really continuous. So, if we have continuous monitoring, I'm cool with that. I like it.
Yeah, it's a good one, right? Because if you give your developers autonomy, right, and that shift and left mindset, you want that continuous compliance monitoring, because, like, hey, the resources that you're creating, are they compliant with the different frameworks, but also my own organizational standards? Do they have tags? And I'm going to say tags 3 times for the people on the other side of the internet, because it's very important, because tags help you to understand what resources and who the resources belong to. Because from an IR standpoint, like, if an incident occurs and you say, okay, who does this belong to? It's a very important piece of the puzzle, because you may have to, or part of your IR procedures may, let's get the account owner on the phone, right? In terms of, we spin up an incident call or something along those lines. All right, who's the account owner? Well, that goes into those pieces of, do you have the documentation? Do you have the tags? Do you have all those pieces? And then Bevan mentions vulnerability scanning. Yeah, that's a great one as well, right? Do you have those automated capabilities? I am partial to the custom security rules, right? You go down to custom config alerts and things of that nature. So those are always great. So it's really up to the organizational's use case. And we have a couple of votes in for one with the automated vulnerability scanning. So that is great. The other piece is starting to understand, where are you coming from as an organization, right? How do you unlock the achievement, right? The first piece of this is to understand, one, what is an achievement, but two, where are we going with it, right? And usually the easy answers are best practices. But what does best practices mean in this context? So, Russ, if we were thinking about unlocking, right, the security achievement and getting the pop-up, how do we do so when it comes to security automation?
Yeah, definitely. So for automation, especially for best practices, the things that I think of, so starting with your baseline. So for me, that's whatever looks normal, routine, basically things that aren't really in question for your existing workflows. And so using that to be able to integrate security. So looking at baseline and seeing, okay, where do these things differ? So adding in different security checks like vulnerability scanning. So, hey, looking at our code, what potential vulnerabilities pop up in this? Configuration checks. So adding in configuration checks, seeing how does this differ from our baseline? Is this in compliance with what we're looking to do? Does it match? Does it go outside of that area? And then compliance monitoring. So those are the things, and of course, documentation, standardization, and documentation, because you don't know if things are within configuration or within their compliance without knowing what yours is for your environment. So that's what I think of when I think of like basic fundamental best practices. And I think that we kind of, run into some, I guess, common pitfalls, things that we, kind of run into while trying to do this and get this achievement. So for example, over automating without, proper oversight. So I kind of think of this as like, your rogue engineer type of situation. Didn't use documentation, didn't use, didn't basically automate according to the plan. And so that is something that can, once you start messing with your automation, especially in a way that's not pre-approved or well-defined, you don't, especially depending on what you're doing, you're not sure because it's over-automated. So you're not sure where it's going to interfere with your workflows and where it might just completely crash everything and bring you down. So there's some other things like alert fatigue. I talk about that all the time. So I like this one, tool sprawl. So just like trying to, it's the same thing as scope creep really, but with a tool. So trying to create this maybe custom script or custom automation or security tool on your own, and then realizing, hey, this doesn't work with this tool or this service or our resources here or there. So kind of integrating those customs and kind of making your scripts do too much. I think that's another common thing that people kind of run into. And then I'm going to kind of run through these things as quickly as I can because we just don't have time. But how to avoid those is really to start small and scale gradually, focusing on high impact areas and critical data, and then establishing clear processes with regular reviews of those processes. So there's a lot of different testing strategies that can be used in order to kind of increase and get your achievement. But mostly it comes down to automated scanning and penetration testing. So automated scans and then manual scans. You're looking at testing, integrating with the CI/CD pipeline, but you're using that mostly to enable those points of those checks, security checks into your pipeline. Then,
And
like you were referring to earlier, making sure that you're measuring all your KPIs and your time to detect and time to resolve and stuff like that, and just ensuring that you're not only looking to implement all this great automation, but you're also doing something with that information. So here's this information. This is our mean time to resolve. Here's why it takes us longer to do these, or here's why we're able to do these really fast because we have this automation or this whatever. So that kind of, actually what you're doing with your security and how you're improving it and being able to convey that to stakeholders or other teams that aren't involved in security. So there's a lot, really, I think, in getting that achievement. But you don't get achievements for easy things in most of the time.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, sometimes you get achievements when you do things that are off the beaten path, right? And what we mean by that is like, hey, let's look at something differently, right? And let's do this, right? It's something we notice. In particular, if you are a real achievement hunter out there, you notice like, hey, if I press this button and then walk across the room and press the other button, then it says, hey, achievement unlocked. And it's kind of the same mentality of just trying to figure out how things work and trying to see, hey, what is the full picture of this? I have this button on this wall and there was a button on the other wall. Let me combine both of these things. So the other piece I would quickly mention is when it comes to like multi-cloud environments. It's an important concept. You talked about tool sprawl. That's another piece of, hey, let's ship our logs from this cloud to this cloud, back down to the data center, up to this cloud.
Oh, yeah.
And then we
Mount
have
sprawl.
all these tools. Yeah. And it's just like, well, let's look at and leverage maybe some of the native tool sets. But how do we do that? Well, we have to kind of explore some of the native tools for each of the different locations to see what fits. And from an AWS perspective, what you want to look at and what customers we recommend is looking at, hey, some certificate knowledge, right? What are certifications? Well, the certification help you delve into some of the different pieces of the puzzle by understanding, hey, what does config do? What does something like Security Hub do? That way, when you are ready, you can go on something like a knowledge quest. And for you first-time joiners, we're going to do a speed run of exactly 1 minute of what a knowledge quest is. Well, a knowledge quest essentially is that piece of information that you grab at 5 a.m. after your run, right? You grab a beverage of your choice, coffee, tea, or water, or other. And you start to dive into, hey, what do we need to know? Especially when it comes to something like shifting left. There's a bunch of different pieces of the puzzle that you have to consider. So where do we start? Well, we start by understanding, if we're talking about DevSecOps, hey, how do we shift left? What are the chronicles? And what are chronicles? Well, I would explain it, but we don't have time. So we're going to just continue on with that, right? You like the spoilers. So first, we remove this, and we add this. So what is Security Hub? Figuring out the different security servers. What is config? All these different pieces of the puzzle, because essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to level up your maturity ranking. And we can get the different pieces of, being a security initiative and pipeline defender and security automation. We went through these fast because usually achievements pop up right back to back to back, right? But essentially what we're trying to get to is the understanding of what examples we can go down, like the security reference architecture. And it's a very important part to consider. And we went through this fast, but there's a secret to why we did that, because there's a part 2 coming up next week when we talk about some advanced mechanisms. So we're going to keep those achievements in mind and how we're going to get to them. But first, Russ, what do we have to do?
Please create an incident response plan.
Yes, please do that. And also, please join us next week. As always, thank you. And keep leveling up with your own experience points, 1 XP point at a time. So until next time, have a great one. And thank you
Happy
again.
Monday.